districts overview. So if somebody can give me a thumbs up that they can see that, we're good to go. Thank you. So I'd like to take a minute to go over how the meeting will work today. We're going to narrate a few slides on our meeting topic. We ask that you, if you have comments and questions along the way as they come to you as we're going through the slides, please feel free to enter them in the chat feature of Zoom, and we will try to keep up with answers and responses as best we can in live time. And then at the end of the slides, we can open up and go back and review any comments that need further discussion, or comments or questions that we haven't had a chance to get to yet and answer, and we'll try to do our best to wrap everything up. What I'd like to do, just to make sure that you are able to use chat, is before we go any further, let's take a couple of minutes, and I'm going to ask everybody in the room if they can go to the chat feature. Hopefully you can find it. Should be somewhere in your on the top of your Zoom screen, and just enter your name and the affiliation. If you're representing a company or a firm or a neighborhood, just feel free to put that in as well, just so that everybody in the room can see who else is here and where they're from, and then we'll just get everybody using the chat feature before we go on. So let's take a couple of minutes and do that. Oh, good. We've got lots of people coming in, so this is great. So it looks like just about everybody is familiar with how to use the chat feature. If you're not,
could
yes.
you just go over it real quickly in case there's anyone having any challenge finding it?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if somebody, well, I was going to say if somebody doesn't know how to use chat, you can raise your hand, but if you probably can't find that either, if you don't know how to use the chat feature is in the top part of the Zoom window. It's just to the right, at least on my screen, it's to the right of the home button. It looks like everybody is able to do that. We still have a couple of people joining the meeting a little bit late, so I'm going to just repeat our request. And thank you, Cecilia Hamilton, for pointing out that for Android users, it's at the bottom part of the window. And and Laura's on the bottom part of her window as well. So I apologize for that. On mine, it's at the top. So for those of you who have just joined us late, we haven't started into the presentation yet, but we're asking everybody who's in the room to just use the chat feature and tell us who you are, give us your name, and if you're here representing a firm or a company or a neighborhood or an organization, please feel free to share that as well. So while you're doing that, anybody who hasn't done that yet, I'm going to continue with our slides. So the purpose of today's meeting is to review the UDO zoning districts. And specifically to review how they're organized in the UDO. We're not going into a great deal of depth on the zoning districts in today's meeting. It's more of an overview of what they are, how they're organized, the relationship between the zoning districts and the place types, which can be confusing to people, and to also go over what happens to the current zoning districts when the UDO is adopted. Before we get into that, though, I just wanted to go over our project schedule as of now. We have released the first draft of the UDO, as I'm sure all of you know. We're currently in our public engagement process. We're accepting comments on the UDO up until the middle of January. Once we assimilate and review the comments and incorporate any suggestions into the second draft, we will release a second draft of the UDO. It will be a red line version so that everybody will be able to see what has changed between the first draft and the second draft. We'll go into another period of public engagement where we get comments on the second draft. And then a third draft will be developed. That's the draft that will go forward to a city council public hearing, currently scheduled for June rather. And then the planning committee will recommend, make a recommendation to city council. And finally, a fourth draft will be developed, which we are calling the adoption draft. That is the one that will ultimately go to the city council for a vote, currently scheduled to happen in July of 2022. So that's our current schedule. So a little background before we get into the zoning topic at hand. Just to go over again what the UDO is and what it's doing. So the UDO is a compilation of the various land development regulations in the city that are currently spread throughout the city code in various chapters, putting them all in one place. It is intended to help us implement the vision that was established in the adopted Charlotte Future 2040 comprehensive plan. So it's the regulations and ordinances that implement the vision and the policies of the comprehensive plan. And just to further explain that relationship, the policy versus regulation, which can be a source of confusion if you're not used to working in the planning world. On the left-hand side is we've got our policies in the comprehensive plan, and on the right are the regulations. So the comp plan is kind of the policy. It is visionary. It is what we want the city to be over the next 20 years, how we want it to grow, how we want it to look, the kind of place we all want to live in. The UDO is mandatory. It's not a vision. It's the legal regulations that are designed to implement the vision. So we get a little further down into place types, and place types are being developed now through the policy mapping process, which is underway, and it designates for each parcel in the city a place type, which is kind of like a land use map, but with much more guidance in terms of design and transportation issues and other things. There are general principles that are established for each place type. And for each place type, there will be appropriate zoning districts. These are the legally enforceable rules to implement the general principles that are established in the place types. And then finally at the bottom, we have the concepts for each place type. So for example, we've just chosen the innovation mixed use place type as an example. And in the comprehensive plan, it has some recommendations for the types of things that should be, what this place type should be. And I've just selected a couple of examples so you can see how the concepts in the place type translate into the zoning districts. So the place type policy will say, for example, newer office, residential, and mixed use buildings typically have heights up to 6 stories in this place type. So the corresponding regulation in the zoning district is we have a minimum building height of 24 feet and a maximum building height of 80 feet. So these are the rules that implement that policy. Again, the second example on the left-hand side is that new buildings are designed with active ground floor uses to support a vibrant pedestrian environment. They have tall ground floors and a high degree of transparency using clear glass windows and doors. The way that's written, you can see, is in the form of a policy or recommendations, certainly not a legal requirement. The legal requirement is on the right. It's in the zoning ordinance. So where the policy says tall ground floors, the legal zoning requirements say minimum ground floor height. So that's how we get those tall ground floors. A high degree of transparency is what the recommendation is. The ordinance will say, will set standards for a minimum ground floor transparency, which is the legal means of achieving that goal of getting a high degree of transparency, or clear glass, essentially what that means in a building. So I hope that this slide will help people understand how the policy differs from the regulation and how the regulations are designed to implement the policies. So why are we doing this in the first place? Well, as I've said, this will be our primary regulatory tool for implementing the comp plan, but it also, we think, will create more predictability for future development through better standards. It will align all of those different development regulations that you saw on a slide a couple of slides ago, all of the different chapters in the city code, the different regulations. It will align them all and hopefully make them work better together. It will include current best practices and revised standards. So we are trying to update all of those regulations where it's necessary to get them in line with what today's best practices are. We're consolidating all of the regulations into one place, hence the term Unified Development Ordinance. We think that the new ordinance will be more user-friendly by simplifying terms and creating a common language and a set of definitions across all development regulations. We're using more graphics than our current ordinances have. And finally, we want to make sure that we're in compliance with the new North Carolina 160D legislation, which covers planning across the state of North Carolina. So the content of the UDO, we can kind of divide it into 5 general areas. We have some introductory provisions. We've got a zoning section. We have a section on subdivision, streets, and other infrastructure. Another on stormwater and natural resources, and finally a section on UDO administration, nonconformities, and enforcement. Today we're going to talk about the zoning section of the UDO. So the UDO is organized into 13 parts, and each part contains 1 or more articles. So this is what you'll see when you open the UDO and go to the table of contents. It's going to look a little bit like this. So part 1 of the UDO is the introductory section. Part 2 is where we get into the zoning section, and it has Article 3, which is an overview of the zoning districts. Part 3 has our neighborhood zoning districts, the neighborhood 1 and neighborhood 2 districts, Articles 4 and 5. Part 4 has our employment districts. There are several different districts in this section, Articles 6, 7, 8, and 9. Part 5 is our centers zoning districts. We'll talk more about this and you'll see what these mean in a couple of slides from now. Part 6 are the special purpose and overlay districts. They are all in Article 14. Part 7 is uses, and that is Article 15. We'll talk a little bit about uses. And then Part 8 is our general development standards, Articles 16 through 22. A lot of what is in Part 8 is currently in Chapter 12 of our zoning ordinance. If you're familiar with our zoning ordinance, some of these things are currently in Chapter 12, not all. We'll be bringing them into Part 8 of the UDO in Articles 16 through 22. So let's get into the zoning districts. The zoning districts are intended to respond and implement the recommendations of the place types. And so for each place type that will be established through the policy mapping process, which is currently ongoing, and you need to pay attention to that, that's important. We will have 1 or more zoning districts that correspond to that place type. These are our neighborhood place types and neighborhood zoning districts. And they're again in Part 3 of the UDO. So we have a neighborhood 1 place type that is being mapped. These are typically our more traditional lower density neighborhoods. And for the neighborhood 1 place type, we have 6 UDO zoning districts, N1A, N1B, and so forth, all the way through N1F. And most of these are comparable to our current residential zoning districts. So for example, if you're familiar with the R3 district, which is a very common district in Charlotte and in our established neighborhoods, The N1A district will be very similar to R3. And with a couple of exceptions, most of the standards will look very familiar. Same with R4. The R4 will be, the N1B is the equivalent of the R4, is comparable. And N1C is R5, N1D is comparable to the R6 and R8. N1E is comparable to our UR1 district, urban residential, and N1F is a new district for us, doesn't really have a current equivalent. In our neighborhood 2 place types, which are higher density places than our neighborhood 1, we have 3 zoning districts, and they increase in order of intensity. So N2A is the least intense of these 3 districts. It is typically where you'll find townhomes, attached multifamily, other low density residential. The N2B is a higher intensity multifamily district, typical of townhomes, maybe garden apartment types of dwellings. And then the N2C is the highest intensity of the neighborhood 2 districts. And this will be typically multifamily, taller multifamily, also could include townhomes. So I've explained a little bit about what the purpose of these districts are, but I'd like to, and these slides will be available on our website. So I'm not going to read all of this text now. You can go back and get this after the presentation and go through it on your own if you will. The neighborhood 1 zoning districts, I've just highlighted a few phrases because these are important differences to what we have today. The neighborhood 1A through E zoning districts will allow for the development of not only single family, but duplex and triplex dwellings on all lots. This is implementing the adopted policy of the comprehensive plan. Additionally, quadruplex dwellings may be allowed on arterial streets when an affordable housing unit is provided in conjunction with that additional unit, that quadruplex dwelling. And then the N1F districts are typically allowing for small scale townhomes and multifamily on arterial streets, which are not neighborhood streets, but busier streets. And also in our neighborhood zoning districts, both neighborhood 1 and neighborhood 2, you can have other non-residential uses such as places of worship and schools, parks, and so forth. The neighborhood 2 districts, as I was saying a little bit earlier, are a moderate to high intensity residential districts, and they would permit anything from townhomes through taller multifamily apartment type of dwellings, depending on whether it's N2A, N2B, or N2C. So from the neighborhood districts, I want to move on to the employment districts, which correspond to our 4 employment place types. So you can see the place types across the top: commercial, campus, manufacturing and logistics, and light industrial mixed use. And for each of those place types, there are at least 1 corresponding UDO zoning district. And you'll find these employment zoning districts in part 4 of the UDO. So for commercial place types, we have 2 zoning districts: general commercial CG and regional commercial CR. Our campus place types has 3 zoning districts: institutional campus 1 and 2, and office flex campus. For our manufacturing and logistics place type, which is similar to our industrial areas today, you can find 2 different zoning districts: the ML1 and ML2, which are roughly equivalent to our current I1 and I2, if you're familiar with that. And our light industrial mixed use place type has 1 zoning district. It's the Innovation Mixed Use District, which is a new concept for us in Charlotte in terms of zoning. So digging a little bit deeper into these 4 employment zoning districts, the CG, or general commercial, is intended to accommodate areas of general commercial development. You can think of it as not the exact equivalent, but if I have to draw an equivalent, B1 perhaps, and if I'm misstating that, somebody correct me on that. These are typically auto-oriented, but we hope to improve the pedestrian environment in these areas. So they may be auto-oriented, but we're still trying to accommodate different modes of transportation, including walkability. The CR, our regional commercial district, is intended for larger scale or regionally significant commercial uses. And these are generally very automobile oriented places. Our campus districts, the industrial camp, or rather the institutional campus, IC1 and IC2, are large scale institutional campuses, and they could be any number of different uses, including governmental campuses, educational campuses like colleges, universities, schools, medical campuses, hospitals, for example, social services campuses, continuum of care residential developments, and religious campuses, large religious campuses, for example, maybe a church with an associated school. The difference between the IC1 and IC2 is that the IC1 is more of a suburban style of layout in the campus, and the IC2 is more of an urban, compact, denser form of development, typically with taller buildings, better pedestrian connections. And then our OFC, the Office Flex campus, is for large scale office and research campuses. Our manufacturing and logistics districts are the current industrial, if you will. The ML1 is intended to be the least intense of these two. It is for warehouse distribution and light industrial, so kind of the equivalent of our current I1. And the ML2 is general industrial uses, some of which may have external impacts like noise or dust. The heavier industries would be the ML2, and it would be roughly the equivalent of our current I2 district. And then the innovation mixed use district, which is new for us, is intended to accommodate areas that are transitioning from what was maybe historically an industrial area, but are becoming more of a mix of maybe light industrial, maybe artisan industrial, commercial, maybe even some residential uses in a more walkable neighborhood. We think this is a district that could be used to encourage and accommodate the adaptive reuse of some older existing former industrial structures. And finally, we have our centers, place types, and the accompanying centers zoning districts, which are found in part 5. So across the top, we have our 3 centers place types: our neighborhood center, community activity center, and regional activity center. The neighborhood center has a single zoning district we're proposing. It's the NC, or the Neighborhood Center District. The Community Activity Center has 2 proposed districts: Community Activity Center 1 and 2. And our Regional Activity Center has 3 districts: the RAC, or Regional Activity Center, the Uptown Edge District, and the Uptown Core District. We'll get into some of those details on each of those in a minute. And then finally, in Article 13, we have our transit-oriented development districts. These don't correspond directly to a TOD place type. We are not mapping TOD place types through the policy mapping process, but TOD could be used in our centers, in any of our centers, in close proximity to transit. So to get in and dig a little deeper on these employment districts, the NC, the Neighborhood Center District, is intended to support a pedestrian-friendly mixed-use neighborhood environment. The Community Activity Center districts 1 and 2 are for mixed use, but the CAC1 is for areas that are kind of transitioning from maybe today they're a little more auto-oriented, but we are the goal is to make them more walkable and better connected. And then the CAC2, or Community Activity Center 2, are for those centers that maybe have a better pedestrian environment already, and healthy mix of different uses like retail, restaurant, entertainment, residential, and so forth. Our regional activity center districts are the typically largest and most intense of our activity centers. The Regional Activity Center, the RAC district, is intended to accommodate major employment locations, destinations, and mixed-use development. The UE Uptown Edge is a district that we would typically apply as a transition between our center city, our uptown area, and adjacent smaller, less dense neighborhoods. And then our urban core, uptown core rather, district is kind of the equivalent of our current UMUD. It would generally be only applied in our uptown area inside the I-277, I-77 loop. And finally, our 4 transit-oriented development districts are all intended to encourage and accommodate a mix of uses around our transit stations. We have 4 different districts depending on the intensity of the station that it serves and whether or not it is close to the station or a little further out. Also, depending on whether it is near light rail station or near a streetcar stop. So those are the districts. Now, each of those districts will have some development standards and other requirements that are applicable to that specific district. Not all zoning districts will have all of these standards. So they may have some, all will have some of these. Some of these will have probably all of these requirements, but in general, these are the requirements that may apply to each of the zoning districts. Really quickly, we have lot standards, and they're typically organized in each zoning district in this order so that as you get used to using the UDO, you will find the requirements for all of these things in this order or in a different section of the UDO, but all still within the zoning piece. So lot standards, that could be the minimum lot area, could be a minimum lot width, maximum building coverage, those kinds of standards you would find in the lot standard section. The building siting section would talk about setbacks, build to zones, build to percentage. Those are probably terms you're probably not familiar with. We're not going to get into the details of those today, but we can talk about those at a future meeting, or if you've got questions, we can try to talk about those. Building height, I think we all know that there is typically a maximum building height, but some districts may have a minimum building height, and some districts may allow a building to exceed the maximum height with bonus points, which we currently are using in our TOD districts. Building articulation would have standards that talk about building length, blank wall area, a minimum ground floor height, and possibly prominent entry spacing. Transparency, we've talked about that a little bit already, but some districts will have some standards around transparency, both for ground floors and upper floors. Building design, some districts will have building design standards for facade modulation, entry design, and so forth. And then open space will be a requirement of most districts, and open space can be either public common open space or private open space. Parking, we will not only have requirements for minimum parking, but in some cases parking maximums according to the district. This section also includes requirements and design for bicycle parking and design requirements for both parking lots and parking structures. We've got a section on loading and service, and that includes any required loading spaces as well as solid waste service areas and design. Landscaping and screening is another section in the zoning piece of the UDO, and this will talk about our planting requirements as well as requirements for landscape yards, which we currently call buffers in our zoning ordinance, and any required screening for various things. And then finally, our sign chapter, and I think that's fairly self-explanatory. Now, what happens to the current zoning districts when the UDO is adopted. This is a zoning translation table, and you can find this in Article 3.2 in the UDO. And what this is all of our current conventional zoning districts. I'm not talking about conditional districts or optional districts, purely conventional zoning districts. When the UDO is adopted, the old zoning districts will no longer exist. So they've got to become a new district in the UDO. So we have created this translation table. So for all of the zoning districts on the left-hand side of these tables, and you can see what they are in the light gray shading, they will translate once the UDO is adopted to one of the new UDO zoning districts. This may or may not be the final zoning district for those parcels. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds of how we're going to do some alignment rezoning afterward. I'm just purely talking about the districts that will translate on adoption of the UDO. So you can see that, for example, the B1 district will translate to the CG, which is the general commercial district, as will the B2. Going into the second table, I've mentioned this before, but the R3 will become the N1A, the R4 will become the N1B, and so forth. So these are all of our conditional, or rather our conventional zoning districts, the ones in the gray shading, and the districts that they will translate to. We also have some overlay and special purpose districts, and these are in Article 14 of the UDO. Some of these we have an equivalent to today, and some of them are new concepts for the UDO. The historic district overlay, we have that now. This is generally the same as our existing historic district overlay. The next three on the top row are new to the UDO: the cottage court overlay, neighborhood character overlay, and residential infill overlay. And then the ones on the bottom row, we have general equivalents today: the manufactured home overlay district, manufactured home park district, and the airport noise disclosure overlay district. You'll find all of those in Article 14. I said I'd talk a little bit about uses. Uses are found in Part 7 and specifically Article 15. Article 15 includes a master use matrix, not unlike the use matrix that we have in our current zoning ordinance. And Article 15 also includes our definitions for uses. For each use listed in the matrix, there will be an accompanying definition. And also, if there are any prescribed conditions for certain uses, they will also be discussed in Article 15. So how this works is that you can see in the sample use matrix that there are all of the permitted uses are listed in the first column on the left, and then across the top are the zoning districts. This example doesn't have all of the zoning districts, it's just a screenshot, but there will be all of the zoning districts in there. And so for each of the uses, if you read across, you'll be able to see whether a use is permitted, permitted with prescribed conditions, permitted but only with a conditional rezoning, or not permitted at all. And so the examples at the bottom, I just selected just to be able to talk about a specific example. So the first one, you can see that there is a C in the cell that corresponds to the use raceway and drag strip. Now, we don't have too many of these, but if we did, it would be permitted in the ML2 district with a conditional rezoning. So that is where if somebody ever were to come to us and say, I want to build a raceway or a drag strip, we'd say, start looking in the ML2 areas. The next example is if there is an X in the cell, that means that that use is permitted in that zoning district. And here in my example, I've chosen a medical dental office. And if you read across for all of those cells that have an X in it, you can do that use in that district. And the one I've circled is in our Community Activity Center 1 district. You can do a medical or dental office. The third is you can see that there is a PC in the cell for outdoor market. That means that The outdoor market is allowed with prescribed conditions. Certain conditions have to be met in order to do that use. And you can see that in this example, it would be allowed in our UE district, our urban edge district. And then finally, if a cell is grayed out and doesn't have any letter in it, that means that that use is not allowed in that district. So in my example of the use is the gas station, if you read across, you can see where it is allowed and where it is not allowed. You'll find either grayed out. So that's how the use matrix works. So as you know, we've released our first draft of the UDO in October. We are currently in the process of community engagement. We are accepting comments on the first draft through January 14th. And I'll talk in a minute about the best way for you to make those comments and where to go to make those comments. And hopefully you're all familiar with our UDO.org, charlotteudo.org website, which is really where you need to be if you want to get engaged in this process. So we have, we're currently in a process of having virtual conversations. So last week we had our first virtual conversation, and it was a general UDO overview. These conversations will go on from now through early January of next year. We're holding the same session twice a day at noon and again at 6 p.m. to try to accommodate as many people as we can. You do have to register to attend to get the Zoom link to be able to attend. And obviously you all know how to do that. You can do that at our website, or you can scan that QR code on this flyer if you happen to have one of the flyers. I think you can probably even do it from your computer screen. So today we're in the second, on the 7th, we're doing a zoning district overview. We're having another virtual conversation on Thursday to talk about trees. And I won't go through the whole schedule, but you can see that we're having a total of 10 times twice a day. So 20 sessions that are available from now through the middle of January. So the charlotteudo.org website is the place to go to not only read the UDO, you don't have to read it all in one big piece. You can read it by section. It's also where you go if you have to if you have comments or questions. We don't want your questions as a phone call. We really prefer not to get your questions as an email or a text message. We really want you to use our online platform for all of your UDO comments or questions. That way we can be sure that they're recorded, that the public can see them. And when we do respond, we'll put our comments, or we'll put our responses on the website so that everybody has the same information. So if you've got comments or questions, once you get into the details of the UDO, please use our online platform, which you can access from the website. And the UDO is a really long technical document. It's about 600 pages long, and you know, who's going to sit down and read 600 pages? I know some of you have, looking at you, Allison, but not everybody will do that. We have a 26-page reference guide, which is a little easier to get your hands around. And again, you can get to that on our website. If you go to the top menu bar, you'll see something called Helpful Resources. And that's a drop-down list. And the first thing you come to when you drop down is our reference guide. So click on that. It's 26 pages long. It walks you through the various articles of the UDO and what's in each. And also in some cases provides kind of a summary of what's new in the UDO in certain areas. So we do have some new concepts in the UDO, some of those residential overlay districts that I talked about a few minutes ago. Also a new way of looking at parking in a 3-tier system. We have some new tree preservation requirements, as well as some other transportation improvement requirements. So the reference guide is a good place to start. So with that, I have not been keeping up with the chat because I've been looking at slides. So I can see that we have a very active chat room. So I'm going to open it up to my team and consultants to kind of take some of the chat and see where we need to go with that.
So Alan, it seems along the way, questions have been answered
Okay.
through the chat by some of our team members. If anyone feels like their question had not been answered, though, I want to be sure we got them all. But looks like we just got another question. I don't know, Alan, if you want to begin to read. Looks like Mr. Berlando might be our very last question. Maybe that
Yes,
can be answered aloud.
sure. Robert Berlando asks, what is the difference between small scale townhouse and duplex, triplex? I don't know that answer by heart, but I know that Chris Jeanette from Camiros probably does. Chris, can you chime in and help with the difference between a townhome and a duplex, triplex?
Sure, and others also feel free to join in if you think you could be of sort of further clarification. We have specifically sort of defined these housing types. A duplex is 2 units, a triplex is 3 units. So those could either be attached by a party wall or sort of arranged within a building in any kind of configuration that you would want. Townhouse is allowed to have up to, especially in the N2 districts, townhouse developments can have up to 8 units attached. And in the N1 districts, they can have up to 6 units attached. So it's really a difference in terms of scale. With duplex, we're just talking 2. With triplex, we're just talking 3. Townhouse can be a little bit bigger.
Can a townhouse have 3 units, or do we just call that a triplex?
I think we would just call that a triplex. It gets a little bit more complicated, and we're getting into kind of complicated territory because we have also distinguished the whole sublot issue. And I'm going to refer back to my.
Yeah, so the multifamily attached in a townhouse can look the same, but they may be built under different building standards and have different ownership.
Yep, you begin to get into sort of lotting distinctions and ownership distinctions at that point. So I think the easiest way to understand it is that we're really trying to just get at the form, especially with duplex and triplex, that it's 2 units and 3 units.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Yep.
And just, can I jump in for a second? And so I just went and double checked. We did look at townhouse, and it is a structure that's got 5 or more dwelling units, and each is located on a sublot, because quadruplex can have up to 4. Quadruplex is 4 dwelling units. So basically after quadruplex, you have townhouse, which is 5 or more. And then as Chris indicated, there is the multifamily attached, or where it could be 5 or more units that are attached side by side.
Thank you, Arista. Good clarification. Nick Tosco asks, in the use table, how do you indicate a special use permit is required? We don't have special use permits in Charlotte. We have prescribed conditions so that some uses are only allowed in some districts if you meet all of the prescribed conditions, and they will vary according to what the use is. So we don't have special use permits. We don't have them now, and we don't have them in the UDO. And I see that Laura has answered Jim Teet's question about a rezoning petition. We will still have rezoning petitions. They won't go away completely. We've got another 12 minutes or so, and so we can stay here, and if you think of questions in the next few minutes, we'll leave the chat open, obviously, and feel free to add to the long list of comments and questions that we've gotten so far. Thank you very much for all of those.
Alan, can I make an additional plug for if you guys would help us share the remainder of our meetings across your networks? We saw a lot of people from a lot of different places here today, and we're super grateful that you were able to tap in. You will just help us continue to share these. We are trying to get as much participation as possible. The information you received here today is obviously something that we would like everyone to have access to. So as you look at the rest of our meetings and you receive information, please share. It'd be super helpful for us.
Yeah, thank you.
Alan, I think you may have a couple more questions in the chat
Yes.
as they're starting to come through.
I'm going to go to Hermé's question about the technical difference between single family attached versus townhome. Our use section, Article 15, defines each of those. And I'm scrolling on my other screen. Hopefully can
So
find it.
Alan, maybe I can help you out a little bit here.
Thank you.
In terms of the dwelling types, what we've done is we've defined single family detached, duplex, triplex, quadruplex, townhouse, and multifamily. And so the idea of single family, so essentially if you've got two things attached, say party wall or whatever, if it's 2 units, it would be a duplex. If it's 3 units, it'd be a triplex, 4 units, quadruplex, 5 or more. It could be either a townhome or multifamily attached, depending on the ownership pattern. So really what we've looked at is kind of the form of the buildings that way. And so there isn't really a single family attached. It can fall in one of those categories based upon the number of units that are attached. And those definitions, if you take a look, like Alan said in Article 15, you can see the clear definitions, you can see where they're permitted, and even some illustrations that show kind of what is a, what we mean when we talk about the 2 types of multifamily.
Thanks, Arista, for that clarification. Get back to my chat. Yeah, the question from Dr. Biddle Patton, the plan for getting this information to those in communities without access to technology. Yolanda, do you have thoughts, any thoughts about how to talk about that?
Absolutely. So thank you for that question. We have, as a part of our release of the UDO, provided copies to the local libraries because we do know that there could be, a technology gap. So in addition to that, obviously we are at the very, very beginning stages of, when I say very beginning stages, we're not very far into our engagement process as far as when this will be adopted. I think we saw that in the chat next year at some point. So we will be possibly implementing some office hours so that we may have some time for folks to come by, talk in person. We've tried to do that additionally with our open houses. So this isn't the end of this. We will continue to still try to engage. If you guys have any ideas, we are open to those. You can email, is it Charlotte Future? I'm sorry, Andrew Mariah, make sure I'm telling the email address right. Charlotte UDO at charlottenc.gov. You can actually email that email if you have any ideas. We are definitely open to them. I think that was Dr. Biddle Patton.
Yep.
And just to point out, I think we may have possibly missed a couple questions at the top, but I don't know if we'll be able to go back and grab those.
John Owen, what if you have a townhome community with buildings ranging from 3 to 7 units? I'm not sure I understand completely the question.
So the 3 and the 4 would be triplex and quadruplexes. And when you look at the N1 and the first two N2 districts, you see that all those types of dwellings are allowed. So essentially you can kind of mix those together, within a development within those N districts that you've got.
Okay.
Alan?
Yes.
So there was a question, I believe, about the realignment of zoning districts. So that is something that would be related to this effort, but will happen after the UDO is adopted. So we would be looking at zoning for every property after the UDO is adopted and say, does this align with the place type designation for that property? And if not, are there reasons to recommend a change in zoning to bring it into alignment? Or is there any reason not to recommend a change in zoning to bring it into alignment? So what we'd like to end up with down the road is virtually all properties in our community where the place type designation that the comprehensive plan team is working on the policy map, and hopefully everyone is familiar with that and has plugged into that, will lay the foundation, and then we'll look at the zoning districts on each property to see, does it match? Does it align with the place type? So more to come on that. That is something we did with the transit-oriented development zoning districts, where we aligned those with TOD as part of the adoption of those districts a few years ago. And we'll be looking at doing that on a much grander scale with a lot of community engagement after the UDO is adopted.
Thanks, Laura. And I've just shared the screen again for those of you who may want to take a look at it. Comments and getting involved in the policy mapping and place type process starts with the Charlotte Future 2040 website. And if you go there, you'll see this screen. And if you scroll down just a little bit, you'll come to the section on the Charlotte Future 2040 policy map. And there's a button for Get Engaged, which I imagine is to sign up for updates and make comments, and also to view the map. So you'll be able to view the current version of the policy map. I know that they're still in the process of collecting comments and putting out a revised map at some future point, but this is the best place to start getting plugged into that process.
Hi,
Thank you.
There was a comment here again from Cecilia Hamilton regarding townhome versus quadruplex. Yes, a simple answer to Cecilia's question is I'm in a townhome in a building of 4 units, and each of the 4 units is on its own parcel of land. Yes, there is a difference. And when you look at things like the N1 districts and you look at the design standards, because of the way North Carolina law is laid out, if it's one building on one lot with 4 units in there, even if they're attached side by side, or if it's 4 units and each one is on a sublot, we're calling that, say, a quadruplex. And then when you look at the design standards, we understand that those that are located on, okay, Chris, help me out if I'm getting it reversed. Which one are we allowed to control with design standards?
When they're not on sublots.
Right. So there is distinctions you'll see in the standards. When they are on sublots, you'll see quadruplex, triplex on sublot, quadruplex, triplex not on sublot. And so that's really where you'll start to see the distinction. So we've had to accommodate that. This may be a little bit more technical than what we're trying to get at today, but when you take a look both at the definitions and then at the standards in place in those districts, you'll see how we've accommodated that.
Thank you, Arista, for that clarification. We are approaching our 1 o'clock end, so I don't see any new comments or questions coming in. I hope we have been able to address all of your comments and questions. But again, please go to our website, go to our online portal, and use that for any additional comments or questions that you may think of between now and January 14th. So there is one final comment from Dr. Biddle-Patton. I don't know, I think we've got about a minute left. Laura, I don't know if you can see that, and I hate to put you on the spot, but
I was just going to say, Dr. Biddle-Patton, we will ask someone from the comprehensive plan team to get back to you on, I want to make sure you get the best information on area plans. They do not directly relate to the UDO, but as far as how are they going to be addressed moving forward, our existing area plans, want to make sure we get someone from the comprehensive plan team. Unless there's anyone on here that can speak to that, I'd rather have them answer that. So we make sure to get you the correct information.
thank you. So we're at,
let me just, the last part of that, also the corrective rezonings, that would be what our alignment rezonings would be post the UDO, would really be correcting to align zoning and place types.
thank you, Laura. We're at 1 o'clock, and so we're going to end our meeting. But again, I'd like to thank all of you who showed up and listened and participated in our meeting today. If you can't get enough of this, we'll do it all over again at 6 o'clock. So we'll be covering the same material though. So, and then plug into our future. We've got 10 more of these in the future, all on various different topics. And so go to our website, find future virtual conversations you may be interested in joining, and register for those. Again, thank you.